Hi and welcome to Next App DevCon podcast. I am Shriyank, head of developers community for reactCon, a React Native event taking place at Next App DevCon Berlin. So from October 7 to 9, this conference will witness world's largest gathering of mobile developers at one place. Here I am with Britta Evans-Fenton, program committee member of reactCon. Britta is currently a senior mobile developer at Shopify. Britta, hi and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for letting me chat about accessibility. And
Britta, why don't you tell something, a brief intro about yourself? I already gave one statement, so can you just add to it?
I've been at Shopify now for over 9 years. I started off as a bit of a dev degree student there and have worked my way up to be a senior developer. I really did start to specialize in accessibility about 6 or 7 years ago. Um, and I'm sure I'll get to kind of the story of that later, but I really fell in love with it and realized there was a bit of like a hole in people's knowledge in most cases, and especially in React Native. And I had, being in dev degree, I'd had the pleasure of kind of like doing a bunch of different jobs at Shopify. So I had a back end position at one point. I had, or like placement, I should say. I had a back end placement, I had a front end placement, working on the web. And so I'd had all this experience throughout all these different areas that when I went to mobile, originally Swift, and then later React Native, I realized there just wasn't as much talk about accessibility in this area. And so started to kind of deep dive in it with the knowledge I had. And yeah, it's kind of how I ended up where I am today. So
Yeah, amazing. Even like, when I look at your journey, I found that it's deeply personal. You went from visual arts to computer science through Shopify's dev degree program. That's amazing. And now you are a senior developer building accessible React Native apps. I just wanted to know a bit about your journey. What inspired you to get so much into accessibility?
yeah, well, I think I kind of touched on a little bits of it in my intro, which is like
Yeah.
realizing that people weren't really doing this. But you're right, it is a very personal story because I had my grandmother had macular degeneration, and I really like helped her throughout the last maybe like 10 or so years of her life use technology to kind of continue to be part of the world. She would volunteer a lot. She was constantly involved in like reading, like in her community, but like being a part of it with the news, with like following her ancestry. And so being able to give her some like subtle tweaks in her life with technology was what was able to make her continue to live the life that she wanted. And after she passed, I had done a 23andMe kit and realized that I too have that gene that's linked to macular degeneration. And there is a very good chance that like what I witnessed would be my future. And so I realized I was kind of in an interesting position. I could either like feel sorry for myself, or I could start to really like take the learnings I had learned from the accessibility and apply it and teach it and try to encourage more people to add accessibility into their apps. Not just for compliance, like I know compliance is always a thing that people talk about, but just doing it for future proofing. Really, like I've talked a lot about the concept of pre-disabled. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but it's this
Mhm.
idea that you are like everyone who is a part of the non-disabled community will experience some sort of disability, whether it's situational, temporary, or a permanent disability, potentially as they age,
Mhm.
losing vision or what have you. And I really do believe that everyone is pre-disabled. I'm pre-disabled. I think I have a little bit more of the dots I can connect to say that I'm pre-disabled, considering I have a gene that will very likely have me lose at least some of my vision, if not all my vision, at some point. And so, yeah, I kind of started to dive into that, teach people, and ideally make your apps future-proof.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a profound shift, designing not just for others, but for your future self.
Yeah.
And now you also mentioned that, with EAA, that is European Accessibility Act, which is in full swing at the moment, the teams are finally moving beyond basic compliance. They are going deeper and making their apps more and more accessible. I just wanted to know, like once a team has completed the basic checklist, what does going deeper in accessibility looks like? And how do you actually define a React Native app leaning towards what you call as a universal design?
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget how many tools that we use today that were originally designed for the disabled community, um, and for just adding accessibility. So, voice interfaces, so think like Hey Alexa, Hey Google, Hey Siri, predictive text. Like, I don't know who doesn't use predictive text on their phone anymore, because usually you can get to words a little bit faster. Captions, haptics, like your like the phone vibration, like who has their phone, like the ringer on their phone now. Everyone's always got it on vibe, right? And so those are all things that were designed for making things more accessible, and it is used by the general public. And the reason why is because when you start to like build products or think about things, designing up until the edge, you're encapsulating and getting more people involved. And just because something is designed for a community member that like doesn't mean that other people can't use it. I use screen readers every day. Not only for my vision, I will at night sometimes. Like I've been practicing using screen readers ever since I found out that I was likely to be blind. I started to get ahead of that curve and started practicing, but also using it for work. But I am dyslexic as well. And so I find that reading a large sum of text can sometimes be really daunting and hard, and I'm not always grasping everything that I wanted to be grasping from it. And so I'll have the screen reader actually read it to me. And that's really helped with absorbing some of that information. And so these are all examples of like universal design, where you are designing not just for a particular person. Actually, there was a really good example recently I heard. So this came from a book. What was it called? It was something like The Average. What is it? The End of Average. That's it. So it was a book called The End of Average, and they used an example where the U.S. Air Force had created a airplane cockpit designed for the average pilot, which was like 6 foot or something. But they realized in doing that a lot of people didn't fit that cockpit, because there's a lot of people who are taller than or shorter than 6 foot. And so when you are building for just one type of person, you're actually like narrowing your ability, like who's going to be able to use your app, who's going to be able to kind of like access this. But by like thinking about a lot of these constraints, you're opening things up to make things so much easier for everyone to use it. So that's universal design. It's building for those edges, which really just strengthens the center in that sense. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's good to know that, React Native teams are going beyond basic compliances and trying to make the apps universal, like so today with so much competition in the market, React Native developers are building highly animated, gesture-driven and polished apps. It can of course like delight a group of user, I mean most user, but you have pointed out that, like it can also literally make others feel sick. So how do you approach this, ensuring apps are polished, but also that they remain accessible and inclusive?
Yeah, I think it's funny. There's kind of a myth that's like if you have accessibility in your app, you can't have animations, which is not true at all. And actually, I would point you to Reanimated has a really good guideline or guide for accessibility on their documentation. Like it's funny. Everyone also points to reduced motion for accessibility. But there is more than one accessibility feature you would need to be mindful of. Like screeners also get hit quite hard with accessibility. So there's certain motions like that. The swipe to close or like swipe for more actions kind of thing sometimes can be hard for screen readers, and providing alternative ways to do that is very good. Even like buttons that appear, if you don't have an announcement, someone who's got a screen reader might not know that that button appeared, right? Because they're not seeing that appearance happen, and you're not announcing it, you're not making it vocal. So I think there's more than one way that you can actually make something accessible. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like there's certain limitations. A lot of times with the reduced motion, it's to avoid like zoom in and like motions that make it feel a little bit more 3D, can cause someone like vertigo or nausea. And so limiting that use or providing alternative options. So when a reduced motion is turned on, so you can still have those things in there. Apple and Android phones both have those toggles on in the accessible settings, and they even their apps or their like system makes those changes, and you can kind of see and play around with it. I have heard recently some people are using it to like speed up, like for performance, like make it faster because you get to your screen faster. I don't know how true that is personally. Like I think if you have an older phone, maybe it's helpful, but I think a lot of, at least Apple is notorious for doing that automatically on older phones. So I don't know. Like I guess you could use it for performance if you're seeing a difference, but yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like the balance between a delightful app and accessibility is really very crucial, right? Now,
Hmm.
I know you have talked about something called web mobile disconnect, where web accessibility knowledge doesn't quite translate to React Native because developers assume that just because React Native apps are JavaScript, they should follow web rules, but the truth is really different, right? So, what's the
Yeah.
secret recipe or what mistakes developers make when making React Native apps accessible? Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, HTML has this like, or web has semantic HTML, and so a lot of times those rules are automatically kind of built into the components already. When with React Native, you would need to add those rules in. You do get some things for free though, and I think it's important to highlight like because often you kind of I've also mentioned this concept of like once people start adding accessibility in, sometimes they swing kind of too far and they add too much in, and then you have this disconnect on what's being on the screen and all these settings that they think that they need. And so you have to kind of be very balanced in that approach.
Mhm.
But there is like when it comes to specifically mobile, and I know React Native does more than just mobile, so there's even more accessibility features than just those for voiceover or talkback, the Apple or Android screen readers. But a lot of it's just not as built in. Um, like text, you'll get like you don't need anything necessarily for text.
Mhm.
Touchable opacity will not say button. However, button actually does say button as the rule automatically. So you are getting some. You're getting some, but it's just not all the way there. And unfortunately, like touchable opacity, touchable like those pressables, those tend to be what people use more than they use button. And so I kind of wish I've like requested this a couple of times from people I know who work at Meta. Like, could we start adding those in? Like, oh, we can't now. Like, but it would just be so lovely if we could kind of build in more of those elements. I think from the get go, I think it would help the community as a whole, even if it got it wrong sometimes, at least there would be an understanding that it is an interactive element, especially with those touchable elements. So then and this kind of actually like brings me into like when people switch over because we do get a lot of people coming in from web, like they're the React devs that move into React Native. I don't think
Mhm.
they realize how much accessibility is lost, like because they have this concept that like it's pre-built in. This is and the one good thing is they have a concept that accessibility is important usually when they come over from the web, but they don't realize how much is really missing until they've come here and played with it for a while, and they have to add it all in. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I also saw that, like in this era of AI, I feel that making a React Native app accessible should get easier, right? But you have actually raised a red flag here, which is quite surprising. So why do you think that AI is making it more harder for React Native developers to make their apps accessible? I mean, it sounds really strange to me. Can you throw some light on it? What's going wrong in this whole AI picture?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two main things here. The first one is that a lot of the React Native tutorials and template code that I see does not include accessibility. That's kind of seen as like an extra, and because that's kind of seen as an extra for us humans, AI is absorbing that as like, oh, it's optional to put that in, and so we're not seeing that same inclusion. I think web is not dealing with it the same way because there's such a culture around accessibility and web, and semantic HTML is doing a lot of things for you, but also just like there's certain things that are just like built in and you have to do it that way, and that's the way that people build it. They're just a little bit more pressure, I think, from the community to build in things that are accessible. And so you're also unfortunately what that means for AI is you're getting this like push of accessibility when you want to bring accessibility in. It's pushing like, hey, use semantic elements. Like it's pushing this narrative that web is pushing, not the narrative that actually fits for React Native. And so you start to see patterns that web is putting in when you're seeing AI. Some of it is good. I have seen it get better. It's just not getting as like it's not increasing or not being as good as the rest of AI. Like I feel like AI is getting better at a faster rate than accessibility, if that makes sense. Like React Native code is getting better, but the accessibility part of the code is still lacking. I'm actually working a little bit on a project right now with Theodore Apps, where we are trying to add, like trying to create essentially like an MCP that would help handle a lot of the accessibility so that when you're pulling it in, you're able to like do accessibility in a way that I would do accessibility or the way that they would do accessibility so that it can be used by more people and it can be seen as a more common thing. Because like often, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's usually like one or two like accessible experts in every company. And that's where the knowledge kind of stays. And so it'd be nice to kind of like expand that out a little bit and yeah, have more accessible experts in the field. So
Yeah, it sounds like, like AI itself needs to be more accessible to let developers make
yes.
React Native apps more accessible, right? So, Britta, you have worked in multiple roles so far. You have been an individual contributor, mentor, instructor, speaker, and also a technical lead. So, what's the hardest lesson from your earlier experiences that shapes how you approach accessibility at your current job at Shopify as a React Native developer?
Ooh, good question. So I definitely think that when I first started with accessibility, I was just doing it all. Like I was focusing on so much of like, I need to get this in, and I would speak on accessibility, but because it was just faster for me to do it, I was the one often just like doing it. And I will admit there are a lot of blockers that sometimes slow people down, which discourage people. And so I've kind of like shifted that approach quite a bit. And I've had a lot more developers on my team that I've like my little like army I refer to as like, and it's not just like my direct teammates, but on sister teams, on other teams within point of sale. I'm specifically on the point of sale app, but I try to get them to include, or when I'm running through, if we're on a tight deadline and I'm just making the changes, I'll actually explain a lot of the changes in the PR as like, hey, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing this, to kind of like educate a lot more. I've done some videos in house, just to try to like teach more of that in a larger, slightly like still internal, unfortunately, but hopefully one day I can make it more external and have more teaching opportunities. Maybe some YouTube videos. I keep talking about you doing YouTube videos for this, but I think it would be so valuable to have more of that information readily available. But yeah, there is this like interesting dynamic as well that you have to be careful with accessibility. Like you really need to be optimistic, and you kind of want to get ahead of the curve instead of it being like the last minute thing. You want to make sure that it's done alongside the project, or else it'll be forgotten. It'll be like, oh, we'll put it in the next version, which is never good. Like V2 is never an option. So getting into it, talking about it a lot more. People usually know when I'm piping up it's what it's for because I'm like, hey, this thing isn't done. Like, can we fix this? And so that way we can prevent any situations like providing non-accessible elements or workflows, right? What else? There's like, I also think getting the right like buy-in is really important. So having like understanding what a team cares about, I think is really important when you're approaching these problems as well. So understanding that when you like if you want to, I don't know, do a certain flow and their goal is that people can get to that flow. It's like, okay, well, let's see what that flow looks like on a few different paths if you had different disabilities. And like, if you need to use a screen reader, what if you were missing like color, like you needed, you could only see in black and white, like you tend to like look at the green. And sometimes it's even just like, it doesn't have to be a disability. It could even be a temporary disability. Like what if there is like blaring light on your iPad screen, and it's hard to see, like, is the contrast good enough for you to see that? And so kind of working through there and finding that finding that like thing that resonates with each team, I think, is also pretty important in order to help encourage people to add accessibility. But I think most people know that, like, it's the right thing to do. They just don't know how to do it. Like, it's not about whether they want to. It's about how do they do it? How do they balance it? What do they need? What do they not need? And slowly teaching that through. But yeah, we've got a little bit of an army now of people who understand accessibility, on my team anyways. And I hopefully, as I encourage to do more and more talks, hopefully we have a larger and larger army within the React Native community for that too.
Yeah, I think you have a lot to share. And let's move on to the next question, which is kind of a generic one. Very soon, as a program committee member of reactCon, you will soon be reviewing CFPs we will receive from the React Native community, right? I know your area of interest is, of course, accessibility, but as a React Native developer, what would you like to see in those submissions that can help developers attending the conference gain something which could be lacking in other conferences?
I mean, I'm definitely going to start with the accessibility. I know that it's like everyone knows that I'm going to talk about that, but I think for so long there's been so many talks on just like the basics, and I think now that the EAA is in, now that people are focusing a little bit more on some of the more fun things you can do with accessibility, not just like adding labels, adding hints, adding rules, adding states. Like, those things have been talked about so much. You can watch so many videos on that. And I've even tried to kind of get away from that, but there's always been this like, okay, well, we need to make sure that people with no knowledge of this subject have at least something to go off of. And so there'll always be those talks, but kind of going above and beyond, I think, would be amazing. And then I'm really interested in how all the creative ways people are using AI. I think there are so many fun different ways that people are using it. And there's a lot of like documented ways, but I want to see more like off the beaten pathways that people are using AI to achieve things, especially with like React Native. I think for so long, and maybe this is just because I've been working in this space for long enough, but I feel like when I first started searching for help, when I was a really junior dev, like looking at like how to do this in React Native, how to do that in React Native, you get all the React stuff. And now you're actually starting to see like really good React Native recommendations on AI. And I want to see where that kind of goes. I want to see who's got some really interesting solutions on how they're approaching this. I'm really curious actually on the number of vibe coded apps that people will have in all of their talks, because it's really easy to like talk about something with an app, and having a quick whipped out app, I think, is a really fun way to do that. What else? There's so much fun. I think animations are really cool, and I would love to kind of play around a little bit more with some really like advanced level animations. I think like having tiers in any conference is really good. So having some like high level versions of these different things too would be good. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
So amazing. Like, I'm sure developers listening to this podcast will feel motivated to submit diversified quality CFPs and also accessibility, of course. So yes,
yes,
Britta,
yeah.
like, yeah, so we had a wonderful conversation so far, Britta, and it's time to move on to our next segment of this podcast, which is known as Would You Rather Rapid Fire Round. So I will just give you impossible choices to make. No need to
Okay.
think too much. Just pick one fast, whatever comes to your mind.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, would you rather have perfect accessibility but messy code, or beautiful code with zero accessibility?
I mean, the accessible code for sure. I think everyone's got messy code, like especially with like some AI slop. Like, that's just normal. I think you're just saying like, do you want the normal life with accessible code, or do you want perfect code? I feel like perfect code never exists either. I don't know. So I think that one's easy.
Yeah, so would you rather have all animations automatically work for users who get motion sick but look less polished, or have pixel perfect animations that developers must manually make accessible?
I feel like the possible to have picture perfect but make accessible is what we currently have. And this is an impossible question. I think I I want to lean towards the picture perfect where you have to make it accessible. And I say that only because I'm really trying hard to teach people to make it accessible. So I'm hoping I've reached enough people to make it accessible. Um, but that's a good question. I don't know. You know what? I'm flipping. Now I'm kind of like, no, maybe we should just have it so that it's accessible and it's messy already. I don't know. That's a good one. That's a really good question. I'm gonna say picture perfect just because I'm really hoping that I've reached enough people to understand that accessibility is really important. So
Yeah.
I'm being optimistic on that one.
Yeah. Would you rather spend a week testing with a screen reader or build automated tests that catch 70% of the issues?
I'd probably just test with the screen reader to be honest. I think I'd be faster. I am like I guess it depends on like how big an app is. But I've gotten used to the accessible screen reader. I listen to it really fast. Most screen reader users who are used to it will listen to it very rapidly, and I think that catches people off guard. And so if I was testing for an entire week with a screen reader, I I would probably have gone through everything so many times. I don't think I would need a full week. I think um, and 30% is quite a lot to not be able to do in an app. So I'm gonna say a test a whole week.
Yeah. Would you rather have AI generated perfect accessible code with poor performance or blazing fast code generation that requires you to add accessibility manually?
Ooh, this is kind of like that question. It's like, have I reached enough people yet? I think having poor performance would be, I think, 'cause I think people would be motivated to fix the performance, um, and they would be more likely to do that themselves. And so this would kind of give them a good nudge.
Yeah, good one. So I will make it easier now. Would you rather teach accessibility by building an app together or by fixing bugs in production?
Oh, definitely building an app together. I think that would be, yeah. I think that's funny because like that's the shift that I really had, as I was saying earlier. Like I went from kind of just fixing all the bugs myself to really like trying to help people to teach them how to and like nudge them in the right direction on how to build these apps and how to like think about accessibility and yeah. So I'd rather teach.
Last but one, would you rather work with a design team that creates ambitious, complex interactions you must make accessible, or a team that designs conservatively to ensure everything is accessible from the beginning?
Ooh. I mean, of course, I'd rather the accessible approach. Like, I think, yeah, the accessible approach is definitely like being accessible from the beginning. I think it would cater to more people earlier, right? And being conservative, you'd be able to be very, um, you'd have. I'm a build for the long term kind of person. If you couldn't tell from building in accessibility so that like hopefully I'm future proofing myself. And so I'm very much like slow, steady, build something the right way once. When a few of my coworkers who balance me out are that like quick YOLO, let's get a prototype going, let's do it scrappy, and so I definitely lean towards let's build it conservatively, let's build it so that it's perfect, let's build it so that it's like working for everybody and accessible from day one. So yeah, that was an easier question.
Now, last one. Would you rather have React Native enforce stricter built in accessibility requirements that break apps if violated, or keep the current flexible approach where accessibility is added by developers as needed?
I mean, I would rather that we enforce stricter
Enforce.
built-in accessibility. I think I like it's just enough of a nudge to get people to do the right thing when you are being quick. I get that like sometimes you want to be scrappy, as I was using the word before, but I think we've kind of just unfortunately the concept of like being a scrappy and then publishing is where we've gotten into this position where we're not actually adding in as much accessible code as I would like. I have noticed a shift with the EAA though. Like I've noticed that a lot more people are adding in accessibility, and that's amazing. And I hope it continues. But we'll see how we'll see. I haven't heard actually any cases yet, but mind you, I'm not out of Europe, so maybe I'm just not hearing it. But I know that here in North America, there's been a lot more like people suing over accessibility, and so I'm hoping the case is starting to come up in Europe as well, and then we can start to see it being just built in as a requirement from day one. So.
Yeah, so I think that was a fun part of this podcast. So yeah, thank you, Britta, for joining us in this podcast. If anyone watching is a React Native developer and has been working on anything interesting lately, you're most invited to submit your talk. Our call for papers is now open. Submit your talk to reactCon, a React Native event at Next App DevCon Berlin. The link to submit CFP is on our website. See you all in Berlin, and don't forget the dates. It's October 7 to 9. Thank you everyone for watching, and thanks Britta for sharing your valuable experience. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.